an honor for me to be part of honoring the 2014 Student Peacemaker, iMatter Youth North Carolina. I have followed what iMatter has been doing around the country for years. I've sat in on a court case they brought in Washington, D.C. I've shared a stage with them at a public event. I have organized an online petition for them at rootsaction.org. I've written about them. I've watched them inspire other writers like Jeremy Brescher, who I highly recommend reading. Here is an organization acting in the interest of all future generations, of all species, and being led, and led well, by human kids. Can we give them one more round of applause? And perhaps revealing a little the short-sightedness and self-centeredness of myself as a member of a species that did not evolve to manage a whole planet, I am especially happy to be recognizing iMatter Youth North Carolina because my niece, Hallie Turner, and my nephew, Travis Turner, are part of it, and they deserve lots of applause. And Zach Kingery and Nora White and Ari Nicholson, who have the good fortune not to be my nieces and nephews, deserve even more applause. I take absolute and complete credit for everything that Hallie and Travis do, because although I didn't actually teach them anything, I did, before they were born, tell my sister to go to our high school reunion where she met my future brother-in-law, and without that, no Hallie, no Travis. However, it was my own parents, who I suppose by the same logic, although of course in this case I do not recognize it, get complete credit for anything I do. It was they who took Hallie to her first rally at the White House protesting a tar sands pipeline, and I'm told that Hallie didn't know entirely what it was all about at first, or why the good people were being arrested rather than the people who are destroying our planet Earth and our loved ones. But by the end of the rally, Hallie was right in the thick of it, wouldn't leave until the last person went off to jail for justice, and she pronounced the occasion the most important day of her life thus far, or words to that effect. Perhaps, as it turns out, that was an important day not just for Hallie, but for iMatter Youth North Carolina. And who knows, just maybe, like the day Gandhi was thrown off a train, like the day Bayard Rustin talked Martin Luther King Jr. into giving up his guns, like the day a teacher assigned Thomas Clarkson to write an essay on whether slavery was acceptable, it will eventually turn out to have been an important day for more of us. I am a bit ashamed of two things, though, despite all of my pride. One is that we adults leave kids to discover moral action and serious political engagement by accident, rather than teaching it to them systematically and universally, as if we don't really think they want meaningful lives, as if comfortable lives is the complete human ideal. We're asking kids to lead the way on the environment because we, and I'm speaking collectively, those of us over 30, the people Bob Dylan said not to trust until he was over 30, we are not doing it. And the kids are taking us to court. And our government is allowing its fellow leading destroyers of the environment to become voluntary co-defendants. Can you imagine this? No, wait, sue me too. Jumping into a case when someone else is being sued. And these voluntary co-defendants, including the National Association of Manufacturers, are providing teams of lawyers that probably cost more than the schools that Hallie and Travis attend. And the courts are ruling that it is an individual right of non-human entities called corporations to destroy the inhabitability of a planet for everyone, despite the evident logic that the corporations will cease to exist as well. Should our kids do as we say or as we do? Neither. They should run in the opposite direction from anything we touch. There are exceptions, of course. Some of us try a little bit. But it is an uphill effort to undo the cultural indoctrination that has us saying phrases like, throw this away, as if there really weren't a way, or labeling the destruction of a forest economic growth, or worrying about so-called peak oil and how we'll live when the oil runs out, even though we've already found 5 times what we can safely burn and keep living on this beautiful rock. But kids are different. The need to protect the earth and use clean energy, even if it means a few inconveniences, even if it means some serious personal risk, is no more unusual or strange to a kid than half the other stuff they are presented with for the first time, like algebra, or swim meets, or uncles. They haven't spent as many years being told that renewable energy doesn't work. They haven't developed that fine-tuned sense of patriotism that allows us to keep believing renewable energy cannot work, even as we hear about it working in other countries. That's German physics. Our young leaders have fewer years of indoctrination into what Martin Luther King Jr. called extreme materialism, militarism, and racism. Adults block the way in the courts, so the kids take to the streets. They organize, they agitate, they educate, and so they must, but they are up against an educational system and an employment system and an entertainment system that often tells them they are powerless, that serious change is impossible, and that the most important thing you can do is to vote. Now, adults telling each other the most important thing they can do to vote is bad enough. But saying that to kids who are not yet allowed to vote is almost like telling them to do nothing. We need a few percent of our population to do the opposite of nothing, to live and breathe dedicated activism, to do what many of you in this room do. We need creative nonviolent resistance, re-education, redirection of our resources, boycotts, divestments, the creation of sustainable practices as models for others, and the impeding of an established order that is politely and smilingly steering us over a cliff. Rallies organized by I Matter Youth North Carolina look like moves in the right direction to me. The second thing I'm a little bit ashamed of is that it is not at all uncommon for a peace organization to arrive at an environmental activist when choosing someone to honor, although I have never once heard of the reverse. Hallie and Travis have an uncle who works largely on peace, but they live in a culture where the activism that receives funding and attention and mainstream acceptance to the slight extent that any does, and far, far short, of course, of activism that has no opponents, like 5Ks for breast cancer and so forth, is activism for the environment. But I think that there's a problem with what I've just done and what we usually tend to do, and that is with categorizing people as peace activists or environmental activists or clean elections activists or media reform activists or anti-racism activists. We came to realize just a few years back that put together we add up to 99% of the population. But those of us who are really active are divided, in reality as well as in people's perceptions. Peace and environmentalism should, I think, be combined into the single word, peace environmentalism, because neither movement is likely to succeed without the other. I Matter wants to live as if our future matters. You can't do that with militarism, with the resources it takes, with the destruction it causes, with the risk that grows with each passing day that nuclear weapons will intentionally or accidentally be detonated. If you could really figure out how to nuke another nation while shooting its missiles out of the sky, which of course nobody has remotely figured out, the impact on the atmosphere and climate would severely impact your own nation as well. But that's a fantasy. In a real-world scenario, a nuclear weapon is launched on purpose or by mistake, and many more are quickly launched in every direction. This has in fact nearly happened numerous times, and the fact that we pay almost no attention to it anymore makes it more rather than less likely to happen now. I imagine many of you know what happened 50 miles southeast of here on January 24th, 1961. I think some of you mentioned you were just in that part of the country. You know what I'm talking about. I see some nodding. The United States military accidentally dropped 2 nuclear bombs on North Carolina and was very, very lucky that they did not explode. Nothing to worry about, said comedy news anchor John Oliver. That's why we have 2 Carolinas. I Matter advocates for an economic shift from fossil fuels to renewable energy and for sustainable jobs. If only there were a couple of $1 trillion a year being wasted on something useless or destructive. And of course there is, worldwide. That unfathomable sum is being spent on preparations for war. half of it by the United States, 3/4 of it by the United States and its allies, and much of that last bit on US weapons. For a fraction of it, starvation and disease could be seriously dealt with, and so could climate change. War kills primarily through taking money and spending it where it's not needed. For a small fraction of war preparation spending, college could be free here and provided free in some other parts of the world as well. Imagine how many more environmental activists we would have if college graduates didn't owe tens of thousands of dollars in exchange for the human right of an education. How are they going to pay that back without going to work for the destroyers of the earth? 79% of the weapons in the Middle East come from the United States, not counting those in the hands of the US military. US weapons were on both sides in Libya 3 years ago, are on both sides now in Syria and Iraq. Weapons making is an unsustainable job if I ever heard of one. It drains the economy. The same dollars spent on clean energy or infrastructure or education or even on tax cuts for non-multi-billionaires create more jobs than military spending. Militarism fuels more violence rather than protecting us. The weapons have to be used up, destroyed, or guess what? Handed off to local police, who will begin to see local people as enemies, so that new weapons can be made. And this process is, by some measures, the biggest destroyer of the natural environment that we have. The US military burned through about 340,000 barrels of oil each day as measured in 2006. We talk about wars for oil. There are also wars with oil, and it's very unclear which came first in that chicken and egg. It was to fuel the British Navy that the obsession began. If the Pentagon were a country, it would rank 38th out of 196 in oil consumption. If you removed the Pentagon from the total oil consumption of the United States would still rank first with nobody anywhere close, but you would have spared the atmosphere the burning of more oil than most countries consume, and would have spared the planet all the mischief that the US military does with it. No other institution in the United States consumes remotely as much oil as the military. Each year, the EPA spends $600 million trying to figure out how to produce power without oil, while the military spends hundreds of billions of dollars burning oil in wars fought on and bases maintained to control the oil supplies. The $1 million spent to keep each soldier in a foreign occupation for a year could create 20 green energy jobs at $50,000 salary each. Wars in recent years have rendered large areas uninhabitable and generated tens of millions of refugees. War rivals infectious disease as a global cause of morbidity and mortality, according to Jennifer Leaning of Harvard Medical School. Leaning divides war's environmental impact into 4 areas: production and testing of nuclear weapons, aerial and naval bombardment of terrain, dispersal and persistence of landmines and buried ordnance, and use or storage of military defoliants, toxins, and waste. A 1993 State Department report called landmines, quote, the most toxic and widespread pollution facing mankind. Now our local police are getting mine-resistant vehicles, but this is not where the landmines are. Millions of hectares in Europe, North Africa, and Asia are under interdiction. A third of the land in Libya conceals landmines and unexploded World War II munitions. The Soviet and US occupations of Afghanistan have destroyed or damaged thousands of villages and sources of water. The Taliban has illegally traded the timber to Pakistan, resulting in significant deforestation. US bombs and refugees in need of firewood have added to the damage. Afghanistan's forests are going away. Most of the migratory birds that used to stop there do not. Its air and water have been poisoned with explosives and rocket propellants. You may not care about politics, the saying goes, but politics is going to care about you, and that goes for war. John Wayne avoided going to World War II by making movies glorifying other people going. And do you know what happened to him? Do you know how he died? He made a movie in Utah near a nuclear testing area. Out of 220 people making that movie, 91, rather than the 30 that might have been the so-called norm, got cancer and died. John Wayne, Susan Hayward, Agnes Moorehead, and the director Dick Powell. You can run, but you cannot hide. It's one planet. We need a different direction. In Connecticut, Peace Action and many other groups have been involved in successfully persuading the state government to set up a commission to work on converting from weapons to peaceful industries. Labor unions and management support it. Environmental and peace groups are part of it. It's very much a work in progress. It was likely stimulated by false stories that the military was being seriously slashed. But whether we can make that a reality immediately or not, the environmental need to shift our resources to green energy is going to grow, and there is no reason North Carolina shouldn't be the second state in the country to set up a conversion commission. You have moral Mondays, there's no reason not to have moral every days of the week. Major changes look larger before they happen than after. Environmentalism has come on very quickly. The US already had nuclear submarines back when whales were still being used as a source of raw materials, lubricants, and fuels, including for nuclear submarines. Now whales are, almost suddenly, seen as marvelous, intelligent creatures to be protected, and the nuclear submarines are beginning to look a little archaic. And the deadly sound pollution that the Navy imposes on the world's oceans is beginning to look a little barbaric. iMatters lawsuits seek to protect the public trust for future generations. The ability to care about future generations is, in terms of the imagination required, almost identical to the ability to care about foreign people at a distance in space rather than time. If we can think of our community as including those not yet born, who we hope far outnumber the rest of us, we can also think of it as including the 95% of those now alive who are not in the United States, and vice versa. But even if environmentalism and peace activism were not a single movement, we'd have to join them and several others together in order to have the sort of Occupy 2.0 coalition that we need to effect change. A big chance to do that is coming up around September 21st, which is the International Day of Peace, and a time when there will be a march and all sorts of events for the climate in New York City. At worldbeyondwar.org, the website of a new project called World Beyond War, you will find all sorts of resources for holding your own event for peace and the environment. You'll also find a short 2-sentence statement in favor of ending all war, a statement that has been signed in the past few months by people in 81 nations and rising. And you can sign it on a piece of paper on the table in the corner here, or you can go home and sign it at worldbeyondwar.org. We need your help, young and old, but we should be especially glad that time and numbers are on the side of the young around the world, to whom I say, along with Shelley, rise, like lions after slumber, in unvanquishable number, shake your chains to earth like dew, which in sleep had fallen on you. Ye are many, they are few.